They didn't even close the door all the way. Just left it cracked open like this wasn't supposed to take long. Like I was just another form to file. It was Melissa from HR, and a guy I didn't know probably knew compliance. She gestured to the chair across from her, like it was a dentist's office, and said the same line they always use when something's about to go sideways. "Thanks for coming in. This won't take long." I nodded, sat down. My badge was still clipped to my belt. I didn't know yet that I'd walk out without it. She didn't waste time. "Paul, after internal review, leadership has made the decision to end your employment effective immediately. We're finalizing your severance, and IT will begin offboarding your access this afternoon." I didn't speak. Not because I didn't have questions. I just didn't want to give them the dignity of watching me scramble for answers. 5 years. 5 years of weekend pivots, impossible pitch decks, client calls from my daughter's dance recitals. I'd built 3 regional systems from scratch, trained every new hire west of Denver, and took one vacation that I spent half on Slack anyway. They didn't fire me for underperformance. They fired me because someone saw my resume on a hiring manager's desk. That was it. The company I'd helped rescue from its own overgrowth decided I wasn't loyal enough to keep. I didn't say anything out loud, but inside. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like a kind of cold recognition, like watching the last 5 years play back at double speed. Every "let's revisit this next quarter" email, every promised leadership track that evaporated when budget season came around. Just hit like, so I know I'm not the only one who's heard "next quarter" too many times. The first time I believed them, it was a Friday in October. I'd just let a multi-region vendor flip under budget and ahead of schedule. My director shook my hand, thanked me, and said, "You're on our radar, Paul. Let's revisit this next quarter." Back then I smiled like that meant something. By the 4th time, I'd already stopped asking. Melissa slid a paper across the desk. It was blank where my signature should go. There was a printout clip behind it, my company email activity from the past 30 days. A line highlighted in yellow. It was the message I'd sent to myself the night I got ghosted after yet another promotion cycle. Subject line: "Let's revisit this next quarter." In the body, just the phrase, "This time, remember how it ends." They thought that meant I was disengaged. What it actually meant was that I'd started saving things. That email wasn't the only one. I'd archived entire threads, performance reviews, project approvals, Slack messages where my manager told me to be patient, that I was next in line. They were careful in this meeting, polite, process-driven, like they thought that would keep me from reacting. They didn't know I'd already reacted, quietly, precisely, months ago. They didn't know I had everything. They didn't know I'd read the employee handbook more times than our own HR. They didn't know I'd spotted the clause in Section 14.4, the one that tied severance eligibility to good faith performance reviews across 3 cycles. And they didn't know that, by firing me for cause without a single documented incident, they'd just breached their own clause. But they would, because what they didn't know was I'd kept everything. I don't remember leaving the HR conference room. I remember the color of the door off-white with a little scuff near the handle. I remember the way my chair legs screeched when I stood like they wanted to scream for me. But after that, just quiet. Not silence exactly, more like everything was happening underwater. The receptionist looked up as I passed, but her eyes flicked away almost immediately. I could still feel the tension in my fingertips from where I'd been gripping the paper copy of my offboarding documents. 4 pages. Printed. Stapled in the top left corner like a school report. I didn't read them. My badge made a soft little beep when I swiped out of the building for the last time. Then another beep when I realized I wasn't going to be able to swipe back in. It was colder outside than I expected. Not dramatic, just enough to notice that I'd left my jacket on the back of my office chair. The one with the tiny tear in the mesh from when that vendor chair collapsed on me 3 years ago, and they promised to replace it. They never did. I stood there on the sidewalk holding a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have, like it contained something toxic. Not illegal, just unfair, slippery. That's when I saw Angela. She was coming back from her lunch run, reusable canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Same green blazer she always wore on Mondays. She stopped when she saw me, just a half step barely noticeable to anyone else. But I caught it. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at the envelope, then at me. "You okay?" she asked. I gave a small shrug. Depends how you define okay. Angela wasn't the type to gossip, but she wasn't blind either. She'd been in enough meetings with me over the years, seen the performance reviews, sat through the same Friday town halls where they congratulated themselves for hiring from within, while giving director titles to people whose names no one could spell. "You want me to grab your jacket?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. Let it rot. She gave the smallest smile, sympathetic but knowing, so they finally pulled the trigger. I didn't ask how she knew. Angela always knew. She'd once told me over coffee that HR doesn't fire people, they document them into corners and hand them a script. I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. I walked away before I said anything I'd regret, but not before she added, "You still have the emails right." I stopped mid-step, turned slightly. "Which ones?" Angela tilted her head. "The ones where they told you next quarter." I didn't answer, just kept walking. But yes, I had them, all of them. Some flagged, some PDF'd, some buried in Outlook folders with names like Q2 Promises and Revisit Meeting. Notes. One thread was 14 replies long. It started with, "Paul just wanted to say, thank you again for stepping up during the client transition. Let's revisit the promotion conversation next quarter." And ended with, "Unfortunately, timing still isn't right for upward movement, but we appreciate your patience." That one was from last fall. There was another from 3 years ago where they copied in a VP, an actual VP, not one of the floating title ones, and said I was integral to the division's expansion. I'd used that word integral to justify sticking around when recruiters called. Now it sat in my inbox like a bad receipt. I opened my personal laptop that night and started reading the employee handbook again. The PDF was buried in an old onboarding folder downloaded the week I started. Version 4.2, Section 6, Paragraph 3. The part about retaliatory dismissal and protected activities. It said, "An employee shall not be terminated, demoted, or otherwise disciplined for seeking alternate employment unless such activity demonstrably impacts performance or breaches confidentiality." There it was. No ambiguity, no asterisk. Just black and white corporate language written by someone who thought no one would ever read it twice. I wasn't planning anything that night. I wasn't angry exactly, more sharpened, like a switch had flipped and everything got clearer. I remembered a phrase Angela once muttered under her breath after a finance review. "They count on you not counting." That line stayed with me. They counted on us not remembering, not saving, not quoting back what they promised in meetings where they forgot we were listening. They counted on us to forget the metrics we carried solo, the weekends we covered because someone above our pay grade forgot to confirm delivery, the time I handled a 6-client region while my direct manager posted beach selfies and forgot to turn off Slack notifications. They counted on me walking away with that manila envelope and nothing else. So I printed the handbook, highlighted section 6.3, and I kept scrolling, because when they asked for my badge, I gave it to them. What I didn't give them was my silence. There's a kind of silence that settles in after a layoff, not the dramatic kind, not grief. It's the silence of clarity. I spent the weekend in that silence sitting on the floor of my home office with my work laptop powered off and my personal machine humming beside me. A mug of coffee had gone cold next to a legal pad filled with names, projects, timelines, Slack channels, breadcrumbs. I wasn't even angry yet, just focused. The first thing I pulled up was an old email thread from last year's mid-cycle check-in. The subject line read, "Next steps, Paul's career." Track Angela had forwarded it to me with a note just so it doesn't disappear. Smart woman. Buried halfway down the thread was a message from our senior HR manager. I read it 3 times before highlighting the line. As previously discussed, Paul is encouraged to explore growth opportunities internally or externally as part of his long-term development. We remain fully supportive of this mindset. I copied it into a Word doc titled Promises vs Action.docx, first entry. Then I opened Slack. The company had wiped most channels, but I had saved screenshots. One stood out. Dated January 3rd, 11:47 a.m. Angela had asked in the Career Growth Q1 thread whether lateral moves were still being considered legitimate advancement. And Erica, my then director, replied, 100%. Exploring fits inside or outside the org is part of how we retain top thinkers. We're mature enough to handle that. Mature enough. I remember reading that and smiling. Now it felt like a line from a bad play. Performative sincerity. The kind you write when you think no one will ever quote you back. But I saved it anyway. That same day, I found a quiet Slack DM I'd forgotten. It was from Malik, an analyst who left 6 months ago. His message was short. Heads up, be careful. When I interviewed elsewhere, my Jira access accidentally got revoked the next day. Coincidence? I never replied. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now I was building a pattern. By Sunday night, I had 4 folders on my desktop. One for Slack threads, one for internal reviews, one labeled Policy 6.3 Retaliation, and one simply called Whispers, my shorthand for red flags I ignored. Side remarks, shrugged off moments. Like when the VP of product joked in front of me, "Don't let recruiting find out you've been flirting with LinkedIn." It wasn't just me. I remembered something else, the quarterly feedback loop the company ran, a tool called Pulseline. Anonymous, supposedly. But IT once confided that log timestamps could be backtraced if needed, their words. So I searched my inbox for Pulseline exports. Bingo. A report dated March 11th. Summary section included this phrase. Several respondents noted fear of retaliation when discussing career mobility outside the organization. I stared at that line a long time. I'd read that report before. I'd even forwarded it to my boss with a comment. We should talk about this at the next team sync. We never did. I wasn't building a revenge file. Not yet. But I was beginning to realize something. They didn't just break a promise to me. They built a system that punished initiative while performing progressiveness. That encouraged exploration on paper and quietly punished those who actually did it. There was one more thing. The exit interview. They'd made it virtual. A bland HR rep with a Zoom background that looked like a fake conference room. She'd asked me if I had any final reflections. I'd given her the safe version, the corporate one. But just before ending the call, she'd looked at me with a flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, and said, "You'll be receiving your offboarding documents via DocuSign. Please don't hesitate to reach out with concerns." That pause, that concerns. I remember thinking she knows. Or maybe she doesn't. Maybe I just wanted her to. Either way, I started printing, slowly, deliberately. Because I wasn't looking for vengeance. Not really. But something about the way they wrote Paul is encouraged to explore growth opportunities and then fired me for doing exactly that. Something about that demanded an answer. And I wasn't done collecting yet. That's when I opened the Q1 team folder archive and found a PDF they clearly forgot to scrub. It was a PDF buried 3 folders deep, tucked inside an old Q1 strategy bundle from the People Ops archive. File name, Q1 retention, flight risk, review, vFinal, PDF. I wasn't even supposed to have access, but I'd copied the archive 2 weeks before my termination, back when I still thought the career mapping session might lead to something. I opened it out of habit, just skimming, until I saw my name. Grayson P., moderate to high risks. That alone wasn't damning. Companies run risk assessments all the time, but it was the supporting bullet points that hit like a gut punch. External behavior suggests exploratory mindset. Has inquired multiple times, promotion cycles. Often seeks cross-functional exposure. Monitored for access consolidation. See Appendix B. External behavior, monitored consolidation. They weren't just suspicious. They were tracking me. And this was dated February 2nd. I didn't formally apply to any outside position until March 18th. So, what was this then? Proactive suspicion, preemptive containment. I scrolled down and found a phrase that made me exhale through my nose, half disbelieving, half impressed. Recommendation, proactive alignment, or graceful exit path prior to Q3. They'd made their decision before I ever made mine. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether this was personal. It wasn't. This wasn't about me. It was about control. I screenshotted the entire page and saved it in a new folder, Phase 2, Response. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, Tara, a compliance officer I'd worked with, back when we were still under the old data governance lead. I didn't ask her for help. I just asked her a question. What would happen if someone documented internal risk notes about an employee months before any HR incident? And that documentation was used as post hoc justification for termination. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Depends on how it was worded." I read her the line about the graceful exit path. She didn't speak for a few seconds, then quietly said, "That's not internal forecasting anymore. That's pretext." She didn't say anything else. I didn't need her to. I wasn't building a case. Not officially, not yet. But my folders were growing. That same night, I opened my Slack archive and searched the old disordered growth pathway thread from January, the one where Erica said, "We're mature enough to handle internal or external mobility." It had 12 emoji reactions, 2 comments agreeing, my own like sitting quietly in the corner. I clicked export. It read like satire now. 12 weeks later, they fired me for external curiosity. I started to build a timeline, not for court, just for clarity. Jan 3, encouraged to explore. Feb 2, flagged as a flight risk. Mar 18, applied elsewhere. Apr 4, terminated. Per 8, badge turned in. By then, I had 6 folders, 3 timelines, and 2 phone calls with attorneys, just advice seeking as the bar requires. I wasn't filing anything, not yet. But I also wasn't planning to disappear, because I remembered one more detail. During my mid-cycle evaluation last summer, I'd asked about lateral moves to another division data strategy. The director I met with, Jenna, told me in passing, "I'd take you in a heartbeat, Paul." But I was told to put all transfers on hold, something about leadership alignment. At the time, I thought it was resource-related. Now I knew better. I typed her name into my email archive. Her response was there, still starred, and in the thread above it, a forwarded internal note from my own VP saying, "Grayson is a strong contributor, but we'd prefer to retain him inside, redacted only. Prefer to retain. Or contain." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all starting to click into place. They didn't blacklist me for leaving. They blocked me from ever moving until I broke formation. And when I did, they pulled the trigger they'd already cocked. I wasn't job hunting anymore. I was hunting patterns. And suddenly, I remembered who else had access to the internal review folders and who'd quietly warned me once months ago about digital breadcrumbs. Careful what you click, Paul. Some folders have quiet flags. That's what Marissa said to me in January. We were in the break room coffee machine humming, nobody else around. She wasn't threatening me. She was warning me. Soft voice, like she wasn't sure she should be saying it at all. I hadn't understood it then. But last night I did. I had the audit trail metadata from my own access logs retrieved before my account was shut down. And there it was, a soft flag tied to one of the folders I'd opened. Not a lockout, not a warning, just a silent forwarding tag routed to an admin queue. That's how they knew when to act. I stared at the line in the metadata. Flag 7C, external activity monitoring, consent optional. I remembered that clause 7C from the employee handbook. It had been buried in a footnote under digital activity protocols, optional consent for internal risk assessments. It had sounded like legal boilerplate at the time. I highlighted it, saved it in a new file. Then I opened a different folder, one I hadn't dared open before. It was the 2020 Ethics Summit deck, the same one they'd made us sit through during onboarding. All 32 slides of mission statements and culture promises. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just chasing a hunch. And on slide 11, under Career Mobility Values, I found it. We believe every employee should feel empowered to explore growth within and beyond our walls. I sat back in my chair. I could still remember the voiceover, a calm male narrator with an HR-friendly cadence. "We don't trap talent, we support it." I had the exact policy clause they used to monitor me without consent. And I had the exact sentence they had used to encourage me to explore. The contradiction wasn't just ironic. It was tactical. That's when I started drafting an email, not to legal, not yet, but to someone who'd sat in both rooms. Victor Tran, Director of Talent Strategy. He'd helped write the handbook back when the clauses meant something. Subject: internal protocols. Quiet concern. Body: "Hey Victor, sharing this in confidence. I know it's been a minute, but I came across a few things I thought you might want to see. Not trying to stir trouble, just couldn't square this with what we used to believe. Attaching the 7C clause and the mobility values slide. Would appreciate your read on how we got from there to here." I paused before hitting send. This was the line. If Victor escalated it, things could get noisy fast. If he didn't, I'd know where he stood. I hovered, then hit send. I pushed back from my desk and just sat there, the silence in the room heavy. That email might have just cost me every future reference, every whisper network opportunity tied to that company. But I kept thinking about what they'd done, not just to me, but to anyone who asked for something outside the script. The last conversation I had before termination echoed back my exit meeting. We're parting ways because we need alignment, Paul, not because of performance. Alignment, that word again. It had sounded neutral then, reasonable even. Now it felt like a leash. And once again, I saw that old growth pathway Slack thread from January. I'd liked Erica's post about external curiosity being welcomed. I even remember what mug I was holding when I hit the reaction, a white ceramic one with blue letters, "Act like an owner." Still sitting on my desk when I cleared it out. Still packed in my kitchen cabinet now. I hadn't thrown it away. Maybe I should have. Maybe that would have made it easier. But I didn't. Because part of me still believed in what we used to say, before they decided belief was a liability. A small line from Jenna's performance review summary scrolled through my mind. I'd read it a dozen times, but it hit differently now. Paul demonstrates initiative that may outpace current structure. At the time, it read like a compliment. Now it felt like Exhibit A. And maybe this is too much detail. Maybe I'm oversharing. But in these moments, it doesn't feel like a story. It feels like evidence. That email to Victor wasn't a nuke. It was a match. And I was done whispering. Ever seen a company say one thing and do another like this? Let me know in the comments. I'm not the only one, right? I didn't have to wait long. Victor replied 9 minutes later. No greeting, no sign-off. Just, "You'll want to see this. Attaching now." And what he sent, it blew open everything. The file Victor sent was a forwarded thread. No commentary, no summary. Just a chain of emails, some redacted, most not. Internal headers showed it came from a policy compliance sync dated 6 weeks before my termination. Subject line: REQ1 External Exploration. Visibility Protocol. Pilot Phase. I opened it, read it again. Buried in the second reply, one line hit me like a body check. Confirmed Paul G. fits eligibility. Quiet flag applied via 7C, no notice required. I just stared at it. Eligibility. Like I'd applied for something. Like being tracked without consent was a privilege. It got worse. In the same thread, another manager, someone I'd worked with, wrote, "He's a high-integrity asset, but once they start sniffing, we lose predictability. Safer to preempt." Preempt. That word took the air out of the room. It wasn't about misconduct. It wasn't about performance. It was about risk. Not risk to the business, risk to their control. They had a category for people like me. The ones who didn't break rules, just stopped pretending. I pushed back from the screen and stood there, suddenly needing to move. I walked to the kitchen, poured water I didn't drink, looked at the Act like an owner mug still in the cabinet and turned it around. It had a small chip I'd never noticed before. Tiny crack on the handle, like it had been dropped, caught midair, and just kept going. I left it there, sat back down, and replied to Victor. "This is worse than I thought. Appreciate you sharing. May ask for more. Not sure yet how far I want to go." He replied 1 minute later. "You didn't hear this from me, but there's a draft clause revision pending for Q2. Retroactive validation for silent flags makes it official. Timing isn't coincidence." They were trying to legalize it after the fact. That's when something snapped. Not loud, not angry, just cold. I opened the folder where I'd stored my exit paperwork, the HR memo, the standard NDA template they sent in the final clearance email. I highlighted a line near the bottom. "This agreement does not preclude reporting of conduct protected under applicable labor or privacy law." I checked the footer, Revs 2021, not updated since. I copied it into a new document and pasted the flagged email below it. Then I added the slide from the 2020 onboarding deck, the one that said, "We support growth inside and beyond." Then I attached the Slack thread from January, the one where Erica posted about openness and exploration, the one the VP had reacted to with a green check mark. And I sent the whole packet to someone I hadn't talked to in years, Dana Rios. We met at a tech ethics panel in 2018. She now headed an employee advocacy nonprofit that tracked workplace retaliation, especially pretextual terminations. We'd had drinks once, talked shop, stayed connected on LinkedIn. I just wrote, "Dana, hoping this finds you well. Had something land in my lap. I think it fits your mission. Curious for your take." Yeah, I didn't tell her what I wanted yet, because I didn't know. Part of me still hoped I'd get a call, an apology, something that made this human again. But another part, the part that looked at that email calling me a preemptive risk, that part was already preparing the outline of a very different message. Flashback to my first performance review. I was 38. My manager at the time said, "You're too methodical. You wait too long to escalate." He meant it as a weakness. I took it as a compliment. Now I wasn't waiting anymore. They taught me to document everything. They just didn't think I'd use it like this. And 2 days later, Dana replied. What she said changed everything. Dana didn't waste time. Her reply was 6 sentences. Precise. No fluff. Paul, this fits 3 patterns we've seen this year. Quiet flagging, plus pre-textual exit, plus post-event NDA. If you're open, we can run it through our advisory triage. I'll handle the intake directly. No names yet. I'll need timestamps, clause headers, and your HR comms chain. Can we talk tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific? I read it 3 times. It felt like someone I didn't know had just slipped me a blueprint to the next room. I replied with one word, yes. Then I spent the next 4 hours pulling together everything. Not a manifesto, just evidence. My HR memo time-stamped. The exit email chain with that absurd subject line, realignment opportunity, next steps. The NDA header with the carve-out for protected conduct. The internal clause, 7C from Victor's thread. The onboarding slide, promising support for external growth. And the Slack message from Erica in January still there, still public green checkmarked by the VP. Each one a line of code in the logic bomb I didn't know I was building. At 8:59 the next morning, Dana was already on the Zoom. No preamble. I reviewed what you sent, she said, her voice steady. We're seeing this more. Companies testing gray zones between internal surveillance and HR strategy. Most people don't catch it in time. I didn't speak for a moment, just listened, she continued. But you kept receipts, and more importantly, you captured intent. That email using the word preemptive, that's not just policy, that's mindset. I nodded slowly. What does that mean legally? Depends, she said. We're not a law firm, but we've seen successful arbitration when 2 things are present: retaliatory structure and broken promise. She tapped her keyboard, then read, encouragement of external career exploration. Verbal, visual, or procedural cannot be weaponized without undermining consent. That's from the 2019 Fair Practice Advisory. It's not law, but it's policy precedent. I breathed in. So I have a case. You have a story, she said, and stories move faster than lawsuits. Then she paused. Would you consider letting us run it in our next transparency report, redacted but visible? It gets distributed to partner orgs and 3 labor coalition groups. I looked down at my notes. No script, no PR spin, just facts. I would, I said, as long as it's accurate. It will be, Dana said. And Paul, this wasn't just you. There are others. One filed last month, another 2 quarters ago. Different companies, same template. That landed hard. I wasn't special. I was just the one who saved everything. I ended the call, sat back, and stared at the ceiling for a while, letting it settle. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in weeks. In my final one-on-one with Jenna, my skip-level VP, she said something odd. She'd paused near the end of our conversation, right after reviewing my exit paperwork. Just so you know, she said, I disagreed with how this was handled. I looked up surprised. She added, but I didn't want to be the one to fall on the sword. Not for this. Back then, I didn't know what she meant. Now I did. She saw it and walked away anyway. I opened a new email window, just typed her name in the to field, hovered over compose. Then I closed it. Not yet. Let her read it in the report. One last thing, I clicked into my old Slack workspace, still had guest access for a few more days. Searched Paul Grayson. 4 hits. One was a thread where someone asked what happened to me. Another was a shrug emoji. But the last one was from someone I didn't expect. Angela C., a junior analyst I'd mentored once in Q3. She'd written, Paul was one of the few people here who made this place feel fair. Hope he landed okay. That line sat in my chest longer than I wanted to admit, because that's all I'd ever wanted. Not power, not a title, just fairness. And now I wasn't just landing. I was preparing the fall they never saw coming. Next part, the first crack opens, and someone inside decides not to stay silent. 3 days after Dana published the report, the first domino fell. It didn't look like much, just a forwarded message. From a personal Gmail account I didn't recognize at first. Subject line, for what it's worth. Inside was a screenshot. The header showed Slack, the exec strategy. Jas, Mar, it's 12, 8:03 a.m. Goes Victor Tran, and the message read, should we flag Paul's external update before his next comp review? Quiet check-in might give us optionality. Underneath, someone had reacted with the eyes emoji. Another added a thumbs up. No one disagreed. No one asked what external update meant. No one said, hey, is that even allowed? It just moved forward. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't shocking. It was confirming. Victor, the guy who once told me, we don't surveil ambition, Paul, we support. It was the same one threading strategy calls behind my back. I scrolled down. There was one more line in the email. The sender wrote, I didn't say anything then. I should have. I'm saying it now. It was unsigned, but I knew the writing. It was Jenna. I sat still for a moment, then opened my downloads folder. There it was, Dana's transparency report. I'd already read it twice, but I opened it again. On page 7 there was a summary chart. Retaliation patterns Q1, Q2, and under that, bullet 3. Pattern 3. Supportive exit language, front-loading used to disguise targeted removal for job-seeking behavior previously encouraged in onboarding. And right beneath that was a quote, redacted. But I knew it word for word. We believe in external growth and exploration, whether you stay here or take what you've learned and thrive somewhere new. It was from my new hire orientation deck. The one they made me co-present to the incoming class last September. The one I'd bookmarked under actlikeowner.pdf. I closed the report and whispered to myself, so now it's evidence. Before it was just a lie. Later that night, I got a text from Dana. Heads up, your case is trending internally at 3 orgs. One's drafting a brief to the Labor Equity Council. Might want to sit tight. I texted back one word, listening. I wasn't planning to lead a crusade. I just wanted my name back. And maybe some friction for the next exec, who thought people like me would go quietly. The next morning, I got an auto-generated alert from Glassdoor. Someone had added a new review to my old company. The headline read, check the Slack threads before you drink the Kool-Aid. No name, but I didn't need one. Jenna again. Aunt Angela. Maybe someone I'd never even met. That's the thing about institutional rot. Once the seal breaks the air, doesn't just leak out. It floods. I called Dana. I want to go further, I said. She didn't hesitate. What's the next step? An open letter, I said. Short, just the facts. My name attached, my timeline, my email history, published where it can't be deleted. She paused. You sure? No, but I'm ready. 2 days later, I posted it. Medium, LinkedIn, and a quiet retweet from Dana's org. No rage, no drama. Just, here's what happened to me, and here's what I kept. It got more traction than I expected. Comments flooded in. I've seen this, almost verbatim. My manager said the same thing to me, then ghosted my calendar. God, I thought it was just me. And then I got a message I didn't expect. A direct DM from someone in legal. Not a lawyer. A contracts admin I vaguely remembered shared an elevator with her once. She wrote, some of us have been watching. You're not wrong, and the audit committee just scheduled a closed session. Your name's in the materials. My name, still in their mouth. Even after they tried to scrub it clean. They wanted silence. Instead, they got a report, a screenshot, a letter, and now, a meeting they can't spin. And what happens in that closed session? Let's just say the part they thought I forgot. That's the part I saved for last. The closed-door session happened on a Thursday. I wasn't there. Of course not. But you don't need an invitation to feel a tremor. That morning, Jenna texted me a screenshot. Just one line from an internal Slack post in the Stahl Strategy Leadership channel. Meeting moved to 10:30. All directors required. Bring documentation. No emojis, no jokes, just silence. That thread had been full of gifs the week before. I didn't respond. At 11:42 a.m., Dana called. No greeting. They're rattled. Proof. Someone tried to quietly update the public ethics memo on the website. Legal forced it offline for clarification. That same memo, the one that once claimed they celebrate career growth inside and outside the company. The one I still had saved in full-text PDF time-stamped and archived. I pulled it up, read it again, and whispered, celebrate growth. Right. By 2:00 p.m., someone from their legal team sent me a formal message via my alumni email account. Subject, clarification of former employees' external disclosures. Not a cease and desist, not even a threat. Just corporate speak for, we saw your post, we're scared of it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Legacy Reviews, Q4 Policy Gap. Paul G. Inside was an email I'd flagged the night they locked my account. It was from Alex, a VP, who'd once called me a lighthouse for younger talent. Sent last December after I had brought up comp parity and career mobility in my review. Here's what he wrote. Appreciate you raising these questions. Honestly, leadership's been discussing how to handle high-potential folks looking. Externally, we might need to get ahead of it. Let's sync early Q1 to formalize. Formalize. as in retaliate in advance, build cover, shape a story. I remember reading it the first time and thinking, maybe he just means mentorship. Now I know exactly what he meant. So I forwarded it to Dana. She added it to the public post with a note. Pattern 4, pretext engineering. That same night, I got another email, this one from Jenna. She didn't even use a greeting. You didn't hear this from me, but they've pulled the act like an owner deck from the onboarding flow. Someone flagged the contradiction. She attached the updated slide. Same title, but the section about external growth was gone. Erased. Replaced with, ownership means commitment to long-term partnership. Growth is valued but must align with strategic priorities. That was the line. The line that told me they weren't just reacting, they were rewriting history. I stared at it and felt something I hadn't expected. Grief, because I remembered when I helped write that slide in the first place, back when I still believed them. That Friday I got one last ping, this time from a reporter. A quiet LinkedIn DM from a mid-tier labor journalist I'd once spoken to at a tech mixer. Heard your story. Would love to talk ESP-RIP the internal review response. Off the record to start. The internal review? I hadn't published that part yet, but someone had leaked it. That meant only one thing. They were no longer managing Fallout. They were bleeding from it. I opened my draft folder and clicked on the file I'd named months ago, but never finished. Title the email they forgot I kept. It was still half written, but not for long, because now it wasn't just mine. It was evidence. I didn't post it right away. The email they forgot I kept. It sat on my desktop for 2 hours, cursor blinking in a silent dare. Because once I hit send, I knew there was no walking it back. This wasn't a burner tweet or a whisper in a Slack thread. This was me showing them the exact line they crossed and daring them to pretend otherwise. The email was from Erica Townsend, then VP of People Strategy, sent 4 weeks before my termination. Subject line: RE Career Development Conversations. I remember how I felt reading it the first time, like I was being measured for a suit I didn't ask to wear. Here's the quote I highlighted. Noted on Grayson's external interest. Suggest we shift narrative proactively if retention isn't viable. Loop in comms for messaging guidance. I'd brought up a mentorship program. They saw a threat, and they didn't even pretend to hide it. No warning, no feedback. Just shift the narrative. That's how they wrote people out of history. So I posted it, word for word, redacted nothing. I paired it with the original onboarding slide, the one that used to say, act like an owner, grow boldly, chart your path. I added one line underneath. Apparently, chart your path only applies if you don't use a compass. I clicked publish. Then I sat back and waited. Nothing for 10 minutes. Then a like, a comment, a repost. Then Dana sent a screenshot internal Slack exec updates. Urgent external post citing internal email. Assess comms, legal response ASAP. Underneath it, someone had typed, we scrubbed that line from the slide deck last week. Is there a version trace? I didn't even need to reply. The version I posted had the metadata embedded. They'd erased the message. I'd preserved the timestamp. And now it was public record. A few hours later, Jenna forwarded a new company-wide email. Subject line: clarification regarding recent posts. The language was classic HR insulation. While we respect all career journeys, we want to reaffirm our commitment to transparency and mutual respect. I didn't finish reading it, because that's what they always do. Reaffirm values they abandon in closed rooms. Rewrite the ending after they've already sealed the file. And here's the part that hit me harder than I expected. Right before I hit post, I thought about deleting that email. Not because it wasn't real, but because part of me, some stubborn part, still wanted to believe I hadn't wasted 8 years. That maybe somehow I'd misunderstood. That maybe if I'd just played it softer, they'd have played it fair. I thought about the time I stayed late to coach Kyle through his first board Q&A. The late Friday night I covered for a VP too drunk to join a call with Asia Pacific. The skipped anniversaries, the missed birthdays. The day Megan called me into her office, looked me in the eye and said, we see you as a long-term partner, Paul. Just hang in a little longer. That was 4 months before they fired me for looking. So no, I didn't delete the email. I published it. And when I checked back that night, it had over 82,000 views, hundreds of shares, comments from strangers, executives, a former board member. And then a message, not from Dana, not from Jenna, but from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year, someone who still worked inside. He said, I saw your post. I have something you might want to see, but I'm only sending it once. I didn't know what it was. I opened the file, and what I saw told me everything I needed to know. It was the first real proof buried in the one place they thought no one would ever check. I didn't recognize the sender. No name, just a string of letters and numbers like an auto-generated account buried in the back end of some compliance platform. The subject line was documentation per 3.6.7b, request fulfilled. I clicked, and there it was. An internal memo forwarded redacted but not enough. A paragraph still visible. Dated 6 weeks before they called me into HR. It had 3 names on it, none of them mine. Angela Prescott, VP of Operations, Thomas Bellamy, Corporate Counsel, David Yen, HR Business Partner, North Division. The text started mid-sentence. Flagged Grayson as a potential volatility vector. Recommend preemptive offboarding prior to FY close. Justify with 3.6.7b breach exposure. Delay formal notice to avoid disruption of client transition plan. I sat there for a full minute, not scrolling, not blinking. Volatility vector. That's what I was to them. Not a person, not an employee who'd stayed through a merger, 2 restructurings, and a recession. A vector. And delay formal notice. That was the week they asked me to train my replacement. I kept reading. There was a follow-up thread, a Slack export embedded below the memo. Timestamps, usernames, everything. Angela.pyaops looping in legal. Paul's resume pinged on LinkedIn. Let's prep HR doc in parallel. D and HR saw that too. I'll tee up a 3.6.7b. We'll need comms aligned, can't have him getting wind. T. Bellamy Counsel. Tag me when the performance memo's drafted. Needs to look reactive, not premeditated. That last line hit different. Needs to look reactive, not premeditated. Because they knew what they were doing wasn't defensible on its own. They weren't just using policy, they were manufacturing the breach. I remember Dana's voice from 2 months prior when she'd seen Angela walking out of legal's floor. That's the 3rd time this week she'd whispered. Someone's lawyering up. And I'd laughed it off, thought it was about layoffs or vendor disputes. Turns out it was me. I closed the file, then opened it again. Because even though I'd read the whole thing, some part of me didn't believe it. Like maybe I'd misread the language. Maybe it wasn't personal. But it was. Because the last page had my name. Not in the body, in the footer. Tracking subject, Paul Grayson. Employee ID 94207. Watch level read initiated April 10, 5:42 a.m. Final action approved June 14th, 57 p.m. That was 4 days before they fired me. 3 days before Jenna stopped looking me in the eye. 2 days before, Angela called and said, "We need to do a quick sync." I should have been furious, and part of me was, but it came slower than I expected, not hot and loud, just cold, settling. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even personal. It was procedure. The same way you terminate a contract or clear out old software, just a risk management line item. But here's the thing, they didn't count on me asking for the file. They counted on me walking away. They didn't know I still had the original email chain from last October, the one where Angela wrote, "Your loyalty to this company is something we value deeply. As we plan next year's org chart, keep that in mind." The email was time-stamped. I'd replied, thanked her, asked about promotion tracks. She never answered, but it existed, and now it sat beside a formal plan to remove me for being too visible in the external market. I looked at the 2 files side by side. That was the moment something shifted. This wasn't about getting my job back. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about letting them explain this under oath. I stood up, took a breath, and I started drafting the one thing they'd never expect. A request for formal arbitration under Clause 4.1d of our own internal grievance policy filed with documentation attached. Because what they failed to remember was this. I helped write that policy, and I knew exactly where the trapdoors were buried. They didn't fight it. That's what struck me most. After months of silence, posturing, and polite threats through their external counsel, all it took was a single binding email chain and 1 paragraph from the employee handbook buried on page 37, subsection 6.2.1, to crack the polished shell of their denial. We recognize that Mr. Grayson was terminated in breach of internal policy and will move to settle. That was the line. No apology, no explanation. Just a tidy admission wrapped in sterile language, the same way they'd tried to erase me. I got a severance enhancement retroactive stock revaluation and a signed letter of full professional exoneration. The arbitration panel didn't need long. Their internal Slack messages retrieved during discovery showed clear retaliation tied to my private job search, especially the one from Noah. He's shopping around. Time to cut him loose before he jumps. It wasn't just HR that took the hit. Noah was reassigned 2 weeks after the settlement. His photo disappeared from the leadership page overnight, replaced with some meaningless placeholder about operational restructuring. I didn't care where he went. What mattered was what stayed behind. The story didn't stay quiet. A few of the younger folks who had stayed in touch, quiet coffee meetups, off-the-record check-ins, started whispering about leadership training seminars suddenly postponed, about anonymous surveys from third-party auditors, about managers walking on glass. I never told them to stir the pot, but when they asked what happened, I didn't lie. There's a funny thing about truth: once it escapes the firewall, it spreads. Angela called me a month later. She'd been the director in another department, someone who once looped me into a DEI initiative before it quietly got shelved. She said she kept a copy of my final exit memo, said it had circulated among mid-level leadership as an example of professional dissent. That word stayed with me: dissent. Same word I wrote in the margin of that DEI draft Angela sent me back then. Not adopted, they stamped. But I kept that version. Not anger, not revenge, just refusal. I didn't ask for Noah to fall. I didn't need a public takedown. What I needed was acknowledgement that I wasn't disposable. That 5 years of strategy docs, vendor battles, late-night launch decks, and policy rewrites meant something. I wasn't trying to burn the place down. I was just done letting them pretend I never mattered. The day I got the final settlement notice, I was sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from their building. I hadn't meant to be. I'd just finished an interview with a firm that valued governance work and actually knew what that meant. They'd read my case summary, asked thoughtful questions, and treated my exit as proof of integrity, not baggage. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the revolving door spin at my old building. It looked smaller than I remembered. Inside my bag was the manila folder I'd carry to that final meeting, the one with the printed copy of their promise: employees seeking external advancement will not be penalized or retaliated against. Discretion and dignity will be maintained. It had been a line on a slide once, buried in some HR roadshow, but I'd printed it, circled it, and handed it to legal. I never used that folder again, but I never threw it away either. And sometimes late at night, I still remember the first time I saw that line. Slide 17. HR Town Hall, Commitments to Career Mobility. Most people scrolled past it, but I didn't. There's a kind of dignity in carrying proof, not waving it like a flag, just knowing you had it and you were right. I'm consulting now, not full-time, not flashy, but honest. I pick my clients, I choose my terms, I sleep well. And sometimes when a younger colleague tells me they're afraid to speak up, afraid to walk away, afraid of what will happen if they say no, I tell them the same thing. Silence is compliance, but you don't have to stay quiet forever. They might not listen at first, but someone will. And sometimes the right sentence in the right inbox at the right moment is all it takes to remind them who they tried to erase. Before I go, if you've ever walked away with your integrity intact, even when it cost you everything, tell me your story. I'll be here sharing mine. And to whoever's still watching from behind glass conference walls, rehearsing phrases like shifting priorities and internal misalignment, I see you. You taught me how this game works. But I don't play by silence anymore. And sometimes I wonder, what if I hadn't printed that slide?